Hi, everybody, and thank you for joining us for this very special episode of the EndlessCelts podcast, where we pay tribute to the late Wim Jansen, who, as we all know, recently passed away after losing his battle with dementia. Wim Jansen, of course, was a manager during the 97-98 season, where Celtic won the league and cup double and stopped Rangers from eclipsing the great Jock Steins' incredible 9 in a row record by winning 10 in a row. And ultimately turned around the fortunes of Celtic Football Club as a whole during what was regarded as a very dark time in Celtic's history. So what we've done is we've put a little tribute together, including all the guys from the EndlessCelts podcast, as well as some of our friends from other podcasts throughout the Celtic community, who to come on and recall some of those memories and what they remember about that particular season and what it meant to them and things like that. So for the next hour or so, just sit back and enjoy listening to some of your favourite podcasters recall those times, and remember yourself what it meant to you when Wim brought the league home, the league title home that season, and what it meant to everybody involved in the Celtic support. So, yep, just sit back, raise a glass, toast Wim Jansen, and enjoy. Thank you.
Club stopping 10 in a row from our fierce rivals Rangers at the time. But what I do know is the legacy that Wim Jansen has left for Celtic Football Club, through my granda, through family members like that. Growing up with my grandfather watching every Celtic game under the sun, he told me about the 90s, the struggles the Celtic faced, the financial struggles as well in terms of Fergus McCann coming to save the club in the last second, Tommy Burns building in that, eventually the Wim Jansen coming in, stopping Rangers doing the 10. And obviously, the advantage that they had on the other side of the city in terms of finances, signing the best players available, Celtic had it all to do. They had everything to aim for, and they eventually stopped the 10. And Wim Jansen done that. He won a cup as well. He brought in the King, Henrik Larsson, Paul Lambert, the likes of them players, built legacies at Celtic Football Club. He was there for one season, but he will remain a hero among all Celtic fans of every generation because of what he done, what he stood for, and he eventually laid the path for generations to come for Celtic Football Club. You look at the likes of Henrik Larsson, the career he had at Celtic, and that can only be down to the likes of Wim Jansen taking that chance on him from a young boy of Feyenoord, bringing him to Celtic Park for in the region of £775,000. Fantastic bit of business. He definitely had an eye for a player, and it's just a sad loss for the Celtic community. My granddad always said to me, he drummed it home to me in the 90s, that I'm growing up in a privileged position. I can see Celtic winning things every other season, even in the 2000s, leading up to the 9 in a row, the quadruple trebles, all that type of thing. He's lived through it all. He told me all the stories, all the games that Celtic went to in the field, previous managers, previous chairmans, all the heartache the Celtic fans faced. And when Jansen came in and took that all in stride, relatively unknown, he was took from Japan, much like our manager Postecoglou at the minute. He's an unknown quantity, and look how well he's doing for us, and hopefully that continues for the long run. But when Jansen came in, probably against all odds, he stopped the 10 in a row, and he laid down a marker. And as I said previously, he brought Celtic back into the 21st century, and something for Celtic to build on for years and years to come. And for me and everyone associated from the EndlessCelts podcast, our thoughts and prayers are with the Celtic football community, the wider footballing circle, his family and his friends. Hail, hail.
Well, it's obviously a very sad day for all of us. So many things you could remember, bringing Larsson, getting guys like Paul Lambert in, letting Burley, but the best memory's got to be when he stopped the 10. Well, if there was ever the saying for squeaky bum time before Sir Alex made it, that was definitely it. He'll always live on in every Celtic fan's hearts. Rest in peace, man.
But I mean, let's just see some of the pictures from Celtic Park. And whoever you support, you have to be delighted for those Celtic fans. Well, maybe if you're a Rangers fan, you don't. But I think any neutral would feel that they've waited 10 years for this victory, and they are going to celebrate in style. And I think it's fair to say that if you look back a couple of months, Celtic at that time were, I think, playing the best football of the season and are worthy champions. Yeah, I don't think.
Well, I suppose when it comes to Wim Jansen, obviously he gave me in particular, a memory that, I'll cherish forever, and that was the fact that we won the first league title, sort of my footballing supporting existence, you know what I mean? So yeah, it was the first time I was able to embrace Celtic winning an SPL title, and of course stop the 10 and things like that. But I always think, Wim and Henrik Larsson will always be associated with each other massively. Obviously, good reason for that. It was Wim who identified Henrik, and whilst we always talk about Henrik Larsson being signed as, this sort of bargain buy signing 650 grand, there was a lot more to it than that. If my memory serves me right, Celtic had to go to court and stuff like that. There was legal proceedings that were involved to get him for that fee. Feyenoord were holding out for 2 to 3 million, but obviously Jock Brown, very well versed in, in the legalities of such, transactions or transfers, whatever you want to call it. They held out for 650 grand or whatever it was. That was the tribunal amount. I think it was decided, but I think it's got to be said that a lot of that must have came down to the fact that, on the footballing perspective, was Wim Jansen was pushing to make sure that Henrik Larsson was signed. Otherwise, why would Celtic go to such great lengths to get him? So I always kind of admired that about Jansen. That he obviously, when he came in, he dipped into the Scottish market with likes of Darren Jackson, but he also gave us Henrik Larsson. Most importantly, and Larsson's legacy would go on, and still was spoke about in such glowing terms. So a big thank you to Wim, not just for giving me my first SPL title as a Celtic fan, for bringing us Henrik Larsson and making Celtic go to such lengths to get him. On another note, a funny memory of the day we stopped the 10, and my dad's no longer with us anymore, but he'd obviously been in, it was one of his finest hours, shall we say. And he'd sort of been ingraining into me, from a young age, how big it was to stop 10 in a row. And I think it was becoming, like, it felt, my memory of the time was Rangers were spending so much money, it felt like it was a likely thing to happen. Anyway, obviously we stopped it with the 2-0 win against St Johnstone, and next door to us, we were like a semi-detached house, right? So, like, on the other side of the semi-detached house was a very Rangers supporting family. I'm still best mates with our son Mark. We grew up together, so him and his dad, the full family, were sort of very staunch Rangers supporters. So I say, and they banged on the window, on the wall a few times through, I think, during that season. So Dad got his own back by ripping his top off, big hairy chest and that, and a big bottle of champagne they had saved, and sort of hopped into their front garden, ran round our front garden, jumped into theirs, pouring champagne all over his head. So that was a cool memory as well. So yes, Wim will be sadly missed, but he's given me some good football memories, and an extremely funny one, and a nice, genuine one of my late dad as well. So thank you, Wim.
Yeah, so my memories of him, obviously, I was a young boy, 13-year-old, when he came into Celtic, and he obviously had to get rid of, he sold Van Hooijdonk, got rid of Cadet, and they can't, well, say got rid of him, he was sort of his hand forced in getting rid of them. So we'd lost like the three amigos, three really top players. Rangers, I think that season, something in the back of my head, I know they spent an absolute whack of cash to try and get the 10. Obviously it would have been throughout the season. They made various sense, there was no sort of a transfer window then, but I think they were one of the biggest spenders in the UK that season. And then we obviously brought in guys like your Craig Burleys, who else, Lambert and stuff, Mark Reaper, and guys like Stephen Mahy and Jonathan Gould that went on to play big parts. Bradburn, who came in the January, that will always go down in a wee bit of folklore just because of that goal he scored against St Johnstone. I mean, there's plenty of moments you could talk about in that season. It was quite a special season for myself because I went to a lot of the games at home anyway with my dad. We didn't have a season ticket at the time, but he bought a lot of general show tickets, so we sat nearly in every bit of the stadium throughout that season. Managed to go to a few away games and things like that, so that was good in that. And like, there's, I say, memorable games and stuff. Like, you've obviously got the League Cup final where we won, and that was probably the catalyst to go on and won that season, won the league that season. The 2-0 New Year game at Parkhead. I actually watched that in my cousin's house. We weren't fortunate enough to have Sky at the time, so I was down at my cousin's house. He had a season ticket to the game, and me and my dad watched it in there. And man, I thought we'd actually got beat because we somehow managed to cheer and not really make a noise when we were watching the football up the stairs. But the most memorable bit, sort of in memory I have of Wim Jansen, or one of the best Celtic memories he's gave me, is maybe a bit cliche going into the St Johnstone game where we actually secured the league, the 2-0 game. Obviously Larsson scores a goal early doors, and then it's kind of a nervy minute because obviously a nervy game because obviously Rangers are winning and things like that. So he actually had to win that game to make sure you won the league. Bradburn obviously pops up later on in the second half with the goal, but then when that goal in, it was party time at Parkhead, and I was obviously there with my dad again. So we were away up the very back row, right in the Lisbon, what is now the Lisbon Lions stand, were up the back corner, and it just being a 13-year-old boy going to nearly every game that season, it was my first experience of Celtic winning a league that I can remember. Because obviously I was just a few years old when we done it previously, so all I knew was Rangers' success and stuff. Obviously, I had Tommy Burns' success in the Scottish Cup, but winning the leagues and that, and just seeing my dad, and for that moment, he made me realise how big a moment that was, stopping 10 in a row and stuff, and just to be at that game where we win that league, and then it was my first league, and to be there with my dad, it was pretty special. So yeah, that's my memories of Wim Jansen. I'll always have that memory, and it's because of Wim Jansen I've got one of the best memories I've ever got in football, because it's, as a wee boy growing up, it's all you want to do is go to football with your dad, and it's nothing better than going to just go to football with your dad's brilliant, first full stop. But then actually when you start, if you're winning leagues and stuff and actually witnessing it was absolutely brilliant. So yeah, I've got to thank Wim Jansen for that, and again just pass on my condolences, and he'll forever be a legend at Celtic Park. He was here for a season, and just look at the impact he made. Ange Postecoglou, I think, recently made the comment again how figures like himself pass through clubs like Celtic and stuff, and it's on them to try and make an impact in the club, and to do what Wim Jansen done this season, he made more than an impact. So yeah, rest in peace, Wim.
So, it's quite strange for me being, you wouldn't say you're one of the younger team, but I was only 3 when that season came around. So kind of back then in the day, you don't really take in the magnitude of what happened. Obviously, growing up in a big Celtic family, you understand the importance of stopping 10 in a row and what Wim done for Celtic, and just in this short period of time, how much he managed to transform the club by bringing in this sort of new era of players coming in through the door. Obviously, Henrik Larsson being the sort of main person, but just what he managed to do, and he kind of carried on that legacy of playing football the Celtic way, the way that Tommy Burns had tried to do for a couple of years before him as well. And for me, the kind of weird story I've got of that season is I was about 5 or 6, so we're talking at this point Martin O'Neill's in charge, and I went to a school fete at the weekend, not that weekend, back when I was younger, and there was a book, and it was the complete story of the season 97-98, and it had Wim and Jock on the front of it, and Henrik and the rest of the boys holding the trophy, and I think I paid about £1 for it back then, and I kid you not, I think I've still got it now, and I have read that book back to front hundreds and hundreds of times, and it's just that whole story of how it seemed so impossible come January with Rangers get into such a lead, and Negri scoring all them goals before his freak injury, and then just getting right down to almost winning it at Dunfermline in the second last day, and taking it back to paradise for the last game. And as a wee guy, it was just something that helped you fall in love with that team even more. I don't know if they even do these books anymore, but it was about that thick. and just it was a page turner from end to end. This is before you read your Harry Potter books and all that. Back in schools when it was Biff, Chip and Kipper, everybody was reading that. I was reading the Celtic book, and instantly it becomes one of your favourite Celtic teams ever. Obviously the great man behind me here and Henrik being at the forefront of that, and without Wim we wouldn't have got Henrik as well. So there's so much you can thank him for, and you only just wish that he'd stayed that bit longer. Obviously, we've seen what happened behind the scenes with Jock Brown and things like that, and it can't be helped. And there's a lot to be said about his relationship with the wee Bonnet at the time as well. But I think he was exactly what Celtic needed at that point, and I would argue it's exactly what Celtic would have needed this time last year as well. When you're talking about the importance of what 10 is, for Wim, obviously being such an experienced manager, being such an experienced player, although not having too much of a connection to the club at the time, him coming in and not being totally awed by the scenario that he was in, even as bad as some of the early stages got, he just kept his professionalism, he kept it going, and eventually delivered the title. And some would argue that when you look at it, Celtic were a massive, massive underdogs that year, but it's not about the players or the signings, it's about the team spirit that he managed to put into that squad. And you see that that's the foundation of the success that's set to come after Wim departs the club. Obviously, you've got the period of Dr. Joe, and then you've got the period of Kenny Dalglish and totally forgot his name. You're going to need to edit this bit, John. John Barnes, the period of Kenny Dalglish and John Barnes coming in, and obviously you don't see as much success, but the players that come into that, how many of those are pivotal in that Martin O'Neill team that goes on to win the treble the season afterwards? And a lot of that comes from the scouting, it comes from the players that were picked up under Wim Jansen. So it's a great period of Celtic's history to look back upon. And if I can find that book, I'm going to share it on Twitter because it was an absolutely fantastic reading. It was the best pound I've probably ever spent on a Celtic book. But yeah, I mean, if I could go back to that day when Celtic stopped the 10 against St Johnstone, I mean, the parties that would have went on for weeks and months to come, I am jealous of those that got to celebrate it. And, hopefully in my lifetime, I'll get the chance not to experience stopping the 10, but maybe actually winning the 10, just like we should have done last year. But all I have to say, to be honest, is it'll be a massive loss to the world of football from everything that he done in the Dutch game and the Scottish game. The character that he was, the man was a complete gentleman, and I think what he's went through over the last 6 to 12 months really highlights something that we do need to work on in the game. The fact that he was diagnosed with dementia, we do have to look at the connections between football and that going forward, because it's Wim Jansen here, it's some other great, fantastic footballers. At some point, it's going to be players that we grew up watching, and that's going to be even more heartbreaking as well. So something has to be done there. But to end on a happy note, thank you, Wim, not just for stopping the 10, not just for bringing the great Henrik Larsson to Celtic Park, but also for bringing the support together. We'll never forget you, you'll never be forgotten, and you'll never walk alone.
In pursuit of their first league title in 10 years, Celtic's form stuttered. But on Saturday, the long wait for championship glory ended. Wim Jansen became the first foreign coach to lead his team to Scottish League success.
Every Celtic fan, you still know the magnitude of what he done, what he saved really. Jock Steins, his side's incredible reputation, his achievements. But I think more than anything for me, what obviously that defining season really done in Vim's time at the club, he made sure that I've never had to experience the dark days of Celtic. You know, I hear so much about from my dad and my uncle about the 90s, the dark days, the really tough times. But him ensuring that the 10 was stopped and the style of play that he brought in, it set the tone for the Celtic that I really grew up with. The Martin and Neil teams, the Neil Lennon teams, Gordon Strachan teams, those noughties teams in early 2010s, because that was obviously the Celtic sides that I really grew up with. But it was a total sea change, and if that doesn't happen, if the 10 wasn't stopped, you know, who knows where we could possibly have been. And I don't think it can be underestimated how pivotal that was. So I've became a really rather blessed Celtic fan and really had a really blessed Celtic upbringing. Pretty much down to Vim's style of play, ensuring that he stopped Rangers' dominance, you know, during the 90s. So it's tough talking about. It's always tough, like even talking about to former players that you never saw, but talking about a man and his achievements that you didn't actually get to see. I almost feel like, wow, I shouldn't be talking about it, but for me, it still speaks such volumes of what he'd done, because it changed the way that, you know, that I managed to watch Celtic compared to what my dad and my uncles had to, you know, basically endure during the 90s. So it did have a great significance. And, you know, that season, I have been so lucky in my career and the interviews that I've been able to have, most recently with Jonathan Gould, who obviously came in from being, you know, the number 3 at Bradford, and his career was really going nowhere. And obviously Wim brought him up, and he, you know, he became Celtic's number 1 and was Celtic's number 1 during the biggest of seasons. So to speak to him and to hear his stories, and I always remember he told me that, because I remember asking him, you know, how do you get that confidence from, you know, Wim Jansen, obviously, you know, a European Cup winner, a Dutch hero, but how does he have the confidence in you when, you know, this is kind of, you've been struck from total out of nowhere, really? And he never gave him too many plaudits. He didn't really, you know, say, Jonathan, fantastic, or anything like that. But it was his silence, and I remember Jonathan Gould saying to me, his silence was what spoke volumes, you know, and it was almost that confidence in him, but without having to say it. So I think that speaks volumes of what Vim, you know, implemented, the nature of the way that he went around his business at Celtic. Obviously, as well, I've spoke with Jock Brown, my first ever real big interview, and my first interview for Soccer Supernova, my show with A State of Mind, and you know, and he speaks so fondly of him. And in a way, it was a tough period, because the same way with Dr. Joe and Vim, it was kind of just like, this is odd. This isn't although Vim obviously had a very, very prolific career, he wasn't a former Celtic player. He wasn't Scottish, he wasn't Irish, he wasn't British. You know, he was the first non-Celtic player to obviously to become a manager, and first non-Scottish, Irish or British. So it was a risk all the way, really. But he changed the course of history, certainly changed the course of Celtic's history, and made sure for me that I had a really enjoyable Celtic upbringing, rather than what it could have been if it was, you know, if that season had went also differently. So yeah, I owe a lot of my happy memories certainly to Wim Jansen.
Hi folks, just doing a little tribute here to our fallen hero, Wim Jansen. What a manager, a man who's so small in stature, but, you know, changed the face of history at our beloved Celtic. The man who signed the king, stopped the 10 and exited left with legendary status secured. It's desperately sad news, and of course the most important thing is, well, all our thoughts and prayers from all the Celtic family go to Wim's family and his loved ones at this desperately sad time. But, you know, like so many other supporters, we've all got our own memories of that season, a season where we were under pressure like no other. It looked like we were going to be steamrolled. Our proud record of 9 successive titles was going to be bettered. The club was pretty much in the doldrums. You know, Tommy had lost his job. The rapport between supporters and our saviour Fergus was probably at its all-time low. But he had a cunning ace up his sleeve, and that was the man from Holland with all his expertise. And we had to basically build a team from scratch. It was a rebuilding job, pretty much like no other at that time. And but he did sign one or two players that were pretty decent, you could say, and miraculously we managed to stop Rangers at that time apparent procession to 10 successive titles. I'm trying to think, there's so many memories. I'm sure that everyone that's been on so far tonight has got their own little sort of tidbits and memories made. I was trying to rack my brains to do something a bit different tonight, but then again, I'm going to mention a certain game against St Johnstone. Not the obvious one. It's actually the first time we'd played up at McDermott Park that year. We'd lost the opening 2 league games that season, so things were already looking pretty bleak. But we had, at the time, it's now the Premier Sports Cup, the League Cup. Back in those days, it was sponsored by Coca-Cola. And Sky Sports had the rights to it. And they were showing Celtic's match from up at McDermott Park. And back in the days, you know, wasn't too many of us had Sky back in the day. It was only my Auntie Cathy, who lived down the road, that had Sky. And it was proper Sky. None of this Kevin Bridges knew a guy that could get it for 40 quid. She had the proper Sky that was all legal and above board because she used to work there. And it was one of those rare times that I was allowed to go down. It was a school night, primary 5, but I was allowed to stay up and watch the full game. And we were still pretty confident that it would be a pretty easy cup tie. But lo and behold, it ended up going to extra time. So I can just remember it felt like it was like getting ready to get allowed to watch a match for absolute hours on end. But miraculously, we ended up winning the match because so often, any time I would go down and watch a game at my Auntie Cathy's, it was normally the derbies back then, and they were never particularly great stories to tell. But we got the result that day, that night, and we then ended up playing St Johnstone that weekend in the league, and we won 2-0, and that just kind of was the springboard to what became a historic season. We won the Coca-Cola Cup at Ibrox because Hampden was getting redeveloped at the time, and I think it's just about finished. Anytime when I have a look at it, it's probably just about done. But winning against Dundee United, a right good Dundee United side, and as any player for that side will tell you, that was the springboard to then winning the New Year's derby, which we hadn't done in 10 years, and we all remember that day we absolutely dominated and closed the gap, and then we went on and stopped what we thought was going to be or the season that we thought was going to be our darkest ended up being one of the most historic in living memory. It's and Wim Jansen and his background team at the time are responsible for all of that, so all I can say of him is rest in power, and just thanks for the memories and thanks for keeping our proud records intact. God bless you and your family, and you'll never walk alone, my friend. Hail, hail.
Well, I mean, I think every Celtic supporter remembers that season for a number of reasons. Mostly I remember it being the most stressful season I've ever had following football, and my old man feels exactly the same way. It was one of these seasons that I don't think I've ever seen my old man as stressed as I saw him that season. And what was amazing about Wim is that he was the least stressed person, I think, in the whole of Scotland. We did something really good in how we got a manager to come in who didn't know anything about any of this stuff, who wasn't emotionally invested in it, because his ability to sort of stay above the fray, as it were, stood us in good stead all season long. Some of the decisions he made in terms of team selections and whatnot that year would have been baffling to an emotional Celtic supporter, but Wim always thought about it tactically and analytically, which we definitely needed. There are games that stand out more than other ones. One of the ones that stands out for me most would have been the 2-0 victory on 2nd of January 1998, which was a game we went into, as we may go into next Wednesday's game, 4 points behind in the league. But the stakes that year, of course, were colossally bigger than they are right now. It was as close to being a must-win game as we will ever see in our lifetimes. an absolute must-win, do or die. This is it type of match, and we were excellent. Bully scored one and Lambert scored one, and it was just the sheer relief coming out of that one, and in that kind of sense that we were on the right road, and this was a team that was capable of going and stopping them from doing 10 in a row. The other two memories, one not so good and one really, really good, of course, was the last two weeks of the season. We went to Dunfermline needing a win and could only draw. And I remember that game in particular for the run-up to that game, because everybody in our bus got a ticket for that game except my dad. And he was so pissed off and not getting a ticket for that match. And I can't remember how he found it or where he found it, but he found a ticket that he had kept from the season before that the bus couldn't sell for Dunfermline, and used that to get to that game and got away with it. And of course, that was the day it was supposed to be decided, and it wasn't. And so it had to be decided at Celtic Park the following week. And I don't think I've ever had a more stressful week in my whole life. I'll be amazed if any had slept more than 40, 50 hours combined in the course of it. The day itself is almost entirely a blur. Almost entirely. Just the sheer joy of getting over the line. It wasn't even relief, it past relief. I've never felt anything quite like it. And that was all down to the manager. And when you see the start of the season that we had, dropping points in the first two games, the enormous pressure that put on us right from the beginning, the idea that he had to rebuild the team, it was a complete rebuild job that he did. And he did it very intelligently, and he did it very, very well. It's kind of amazing. The signings that he made were all astute. The signings that he made were all excellent. He could definitely spot a player. I mean, Wim was, apart from the fact that he proved himself a good manager, he also proved himself a good man in the course of that season, because a lot of people would have been tempted to crow from the rooftops, having achieved what he did, after the treatment he got at the start, where you had journalists writing the most astonishing and disgusting things about him. I think it was The Sun who described him as the worst thing to hit Hiroshima since the atom bomb. I mean, really, it's just such low-order nonsense. I remember people like Keevan sneering and laughing, and some of these people are going to pay Wim tributes today, and that, I think, is quite hypocritical, and they owe the man an apology for that. Overall, it was disappointing that he only stayed at the club for a season, because, you know, Wim could have written his own ticket at that point. The fans would have backed whatever the man wanted to do. They would have supported any decision that he made. And the one that he did make, well, at the time was inexplicable, but it's, now that we know more about it, we know that his relationship with Fergus was never good, and there were issues with Jock Brown, of course, as well. So it must have been difficult for him. But through all of it, the criticism at the start, the pressure of that season, whatever was going on behind the scenes at the club, he acted like a true and total professional and a genuinely decent man. He's, at the time, I was gutted that he left, and we'll always wonder what would have been had he stayed for a couple more years. But one thing's not in doubt at all, and that is his status among the fans. Wim was a hero, and Wim will be remembered by all of us, fondly remembered by all of us. Thank you.
Will now milk the moment. It was his 32nd birthday last Monday, and he now takes delivery of the Coca-Cola Cup.
feels very good to win this cup, especially if you see after the game all the supporters. You really feel well about winning the cup. I think that makes them all happy. I think that's important. A long time they didn't have something to celebrate.
I think the big thing for me when I remember Wim Jansen is, obviously the 10, that's what everybody will say, the fact that he brought his Henrik Larsson. I was having a discussion with a friend of mine just when we heard the news today, and we were talking about, is there a person in Celtic history who's had a bigger impact in one season than anybody else other than Wim Jansen, and I don't think we could think of somebody who's had that impact in a single season the way he has. I think from the season, obviously I was 10 years old when he was in charge, so like my memories without looking back on the iconic moments are a bit few and far between, but the overall feeling or the overriding feeling that I remember from that time was just, I grew up for the first decade of my life not knowing really what it was for Celtic to win a trophy. We had won, I think, the Coca-Cola Cup in 95, maybe. I might be wrong about that, but it was sometime around that time. But apart from that, we really hadn't had a lot of success on the park in terms of trophies, and so very different to what we experience today. So to have this kind of relatively unknown guy, certainly in Scottish football circles, come in, not really know what he was going to provide us with, and then, provide us with not only a league title that was something that so many of us hadn't seen for so many years, but a league title that was so key to changing the narrative of Scottish football, or at least stopping the narrative of Scottish football being changed much from, and keeping Celtic as, the first team to have done that 9 in a row, and not having it eclipsed by Rangers at that time either. Obviously, again, I said he brought in Henrik Larsson, which I don't need to go into detail on how that changed everybody's lives as Celtic supporters, but that was vital. And I think the main thing for me as well is, I don't think we value it enough in Celtic managers, and certainly haven't done in recent years anyway, but a part of being a Celtic manager for me, and a part of the thing that I love about Ange Postecoglou today, is I like a manager who's as good, who you can tell is a good person, that he's a good human being. And I think Wim Jansen was that. I think Ange Postecoglou is that. And I think that's a vital part of being a Celtic manager. It's about representing the club and representing the values of the club as much as possible, and making, making the club be represented by somebody that you would want the club to be represented by. And Wim Jansen certainly did that. I think his connection to the club has remained for many, many years. I know that he stayed close friends with Murdo MacLeod after he finished his assistant manager's job with him, and I think he's one of these rarefied Celtic legends who, was with us only for a short time, but made a huge impact on us, made a huge impact on the history of the club, the history of Scottish football, and will always be remembered for that. I think obviously it's sad that his demise came the way it did, and that he's left us at an age where you would have to say in 2021 is probably too young an age, but I think what's clear is his impact in Dutch football, his impact in Scottish football, and his impact all over the world will not be forgotten.
Aye, so Wim Jansen, what a legend. You can't say, that's the only word you can use for the guy. But just sort of tribute towards him, obviously, after his passing the day. Myself, on a personal level, that year, anybody that knows me will know that my dad's a Rangers supporter, which would be a surprise to maybe some of the podcast listeners. But I also had my next door neighbour who was a massive Rangers supporter. He was in the flute band and everything, so the years when Rangers were winning the titles when I was growing up, I had it tougher than most, let's say. And it was every year, 8 in a row, 9 in a row. I had to try and ignore it, but my dad and the neighbour always wound me up. But Wim Jansen brought that chapter to a close. We just stopped him the 10. He was brought in to do that, and he done everything that was asked of him. I can just remember on the day when we won the league, you couldn't watch the game live on the telly, but you were keeping up to date with it on the radio and stuff like that. But then after the final whistle and we'd done it and all the rest of it, I can just remember sitting in the living room floor and just like looking at the telly and taking in the scenes in total disbelief. It was just a fabulous time, and great to stop that. Rangers had spent 15 million something like that in the summer leading up to that and throughout the season, and they looked favourites, and Wim Jansen came in and he stopped it. So I mean, my dad, I can remember my dad sitting in the back of me, and he never even said a word to me. He never wound me up or anything. He just knew. He was like, this is his moment. I've had it for so long, and he just never said anything to me, and it was just great. And then I can always remember heading to school on the Monday on the school bus, and Anthony, one of the guys that's on our podcast, I remember his brother, because he was a couple of years older than me, he had the tricolour and stuff hanging out the bus window. It was just amazing. It was something. I mean, I was born in '83, so league titles in the '80s are no something I remember at all. Even the centenary season, no for me. But so this was the first time I'd experienced anything like that, and it was brilliant. And I'll never ever forget the memories, the personal memories that Wim gave us. But then you go into what he done actually, like for the club and the accolades that we received that season. Obviously, he brought in the King, a legacy that is in itself. Out with stopping the 10, it was just great. But I mean, he won the League Cup at Ibrox. I think that was the first time we'd won it in about 15 years, beating Dundee United 3-0. And at the start of that season, we lost the three amigos. So for to lose those type of players and still deliver, again, he has to be commended. It was absolutely first class. And then obviously, like I've touched on, Henrik Larsson came in. We won the league. It's a season I'll never ever forget. But I just thank Wim Jansen for that from the bottom of my heart, and I really hope and that he rests in peace.
Hi troops, sad news today about our former manager Wim Jansen passing. When I was a boy, although I look a fair bit older than I actually am, my first memories and my love affair of Celtic was the Tommy Burns side. Obviously that was a period of domination for Rangers, so my youth, along with many others, was trophyless and quite miserable until our saviour Wim Jansen came in. My overriding memories of that season were pretty much the derby game, the New Year derby game. McNamara's reverse pass and great strike by Burley, and then Lambert's goal, which is obviously right up there in the top 2 or 3 best derby goals for me. When this guy came in, we pretty much lost the three amigos, we lost our whole attacking threat. I would imagine it's pretty much similar to somebody coming in the O'Neill side and losing Henrik, Sutton and Hartson all in the one go. So an seemingly insurmountable task for this man to come in, rebuild a squad pretty much, turn over and win a league title to stop 10 in a row. You would imagine it's an impossible task, but he made the impossible possible. And he obviously is a legend for bringing the King to the club also. I feel very privileged to be able to see him at our club for so long. One of the greatest and that was all possible because of him. Personal memories. My dad used to take me to Parkhead every year at the start of the season to get the new shirt and get whatever name I wanted printed in the back. And the start of that season, we signed Harold Ratback, and he was going to be our goal scoring striker. So I got his name in the back of my shirt. Turned out he wasn't. Obviously, he scored the winning goal to win the league, but he didn't have the best of seasons. But that day, I don't know why, but the club they were training at the stadium for whatever reason. I didn't know. So as I came out the shop, the superstore at the stadium, all the players are coming out. My dad's nuts. Get back in there, get an autograph book. So we're meeting all the players. And I managed to meet the great man that day. Very calming. I can imagine the influence he had. Very quiet. And I also got to meet my hero Henrik Larsson that day. So great memories. And that final game, fast forward to the end of the season, I was at a friend's house listening to it on the wireless because I wasn't on the telly at the time. And I had my shirt with Brat back in the back still, and he obviously didn't have the best of seasons. And there was somebody in the living room, my friend's house. She's like, "Why the hell you got that guy's name in your back? He's been rotten." I'll never forget the euphoria when we were listening to the radio and he slotted that ball into the back of the net. I can remember just turning around to the guy and saying, "That's why he's won us the league." Probably the hardest league we've ever won, I would imagine. I don't think you'll get many arguments saying it's probably the most important league title we've ever won in our history. All because of this great man. So, sad day. I'm about to go. This is recorded on Burns night, so I'm about to go and hear my haggis, neeps and tatties with my obligatory dram, and I'll be raising that dram to Vim tonight. The man that stopped the 10. God rest you, Vim. Thanks for the memories.
I wasn't paying attention really. I think St Mirren won 1-0, I'm sure they did. And I knew Celtic were 1-0 up courtesy of Henrik Larsson's early goal, but I just knew it was fraught and I'd heard nothing. And my father, whose managerial hero was Jock Steins, he'd been beside himself all season, and I was really worried because he worked himself into a frenzied state, and I genuinely thought something was going to happen to my father all of that season. Thankfully it didn't. He's still around. And him and my brother went to Celtic Park that day, but they could only get one ticket. And instead of giving it to my father because he's better at football matches, he's more in control of his nerves, my brother decided to have a coin toss for it, and my father lost. So my father sat in the car at McDonald's at the Parkhead Forge while my brother ventured off to the game. And so when I get told that Bradburn had scored, I was sitting at Love Street and I sat in my hands like that, and I was motionless, but my insides were doing the Munch scream. And but I knew I had to be professional in my own job and go down and speak to St Mirren players, managers and Dundee players and managers and perform my own journalistic duties, because that was my first ever job. I'd failed to see. I'd watched Celtic in the 1988 season. I'd been on the supporters bus and I'd gone to every game that season, and that was the last season I'd seen Celtic win the league. And I was doing my O grades that year, and I never seen Celtic win the league again until I'd finished uni and I had my first job, and that was my first job as a journalist at the local paper in Paisley. And I've left the stadium, and my father and brother, they're standing just at the doors of my dad's car, leaning on it. As I've come out Love Street, if you remember Love Street, there was a car park right next to the main stand, and you come out, and the two of them are just standing and they're grinning. And I walked towards them, and I just remember the two of them came towards me, and we just started jumping around and hugging and dancing and singing and going off our nut, basically. And we did a Celtic huddle, and we were just, it was just joyous. It was absolutely brilliant. And it lasted for, I think it lasted for a good, I reckon about 3 or 4 minutes, because we were just so happy. And then we kind of broke out the huddle, and we gave each other a look. And I just remember the three of us just had a moment of ESP, and we just raised a kind of mock glass, and we all said, "To Wim Jansen." And that's my abiding memory of that scene and that moment. And yeah, Wim Jansen gave us that. He gave us Henrik Larsson as well. And as you can hear, I'm getting a bit croaky because I get a bit emotional thinking about that. But yeah, it's quite sad that another Celtic legend has been taken to by dementia, not the first. And it's poignant, that Wim will always be remembered for, as I said before, for bringing us the gift of Henrik Larsson. He is a total legend, and will be revered for that. For that alone, the Celtic supporters will always sing his praises. But for the debt of gratitude the debt of gratitude for shattering the 10, that'll never be repaid. But the one thing that they will always have is that championship winning season, the unbridled joy that he brought to Celtic supporters, who will remember it forever and a day, and they'll remember the one and only Wim Jansen.
Ali Jenkinson got the ball through the legs of Tom Boyd, but slipped as he did so. Boyd's looking for a possible pass, waiting for the McNamara run. It's a good pass. In for Harold Bradburn! He's done it! Harold Bradburn scores the goal, which may well give Celtic